For most of history, cities lived one harvest away from starvation. If grain failed, tens of thousands of people did not slowly struggle. They emptied. They fled. They died. But one grain broke that rule. It grew on exhausted land, stored for years without rotting, and fed walled cities through wars, cold decades, and failed harvests. Rome depended on it. Medieval Europe survived on it. Then machines arrived. And in less than a century, this grain was quietly removed from our food system. Not because it was worse, because it was slower. This is the crop that fed cities until modern agriculture erased it. Long before modern wheat existed, spelt was the grain that made urban life possible. This was not a crop for scattered homesteads. This was the grain cities trusted when failure meant starvation. The Roman Empire did not run on bread wheat. It ran on spelt. Legions marching across Europe carried spelt rations. Urban bakeries in Rome transformed spelt flour into loaves that fed hundreds of thousands. The Latin word for spelt, far, became the root of farina, the word we still use for ground grain. When the empire fell, spelt did not disappear. It became the foundation of medieval European agriculture. Monasteries cultivated it, and feudal estates stored it in granaries designed to last through sieges. Hildegard von Bingen, the 12th century mystic and healer, wrote that spelt was the best of grains. She prescribed it to the sick because it was gentle on digestion and restored strength. Her endorsement came from centuries of urban dependence on this single crop. The grain scaled before machines existed. When populations concentrated behind walls, spelt kept them alive. Cities trusted spelt because spelt had earned that trust. But trust alone does not keep cities alive. Urban food systems face a problem that rural farms do not. Cities cannot grow their own food. They depend entirely on what arrives from the surrounding countryside. If that supply fails or spoils, people starve. There is no backup garden. There is only what the system delivers. Spelt solved this problem better than any grain of its era. It solved it better. The fields surrounding ancient and medieval cities were often exhausted. Centuries of continuous farming had depleted nutrients and reduced yields of more demanding crops. Spelt thrived anyway. Its deep root system pulled nutrition from layers that shallow-rooted grains could not access. It produced reliable harvests on land other wheats had abandoned. Once harvested, spelt traveled well. Its protective hull prevented the grain from shattering during transport. When it arrived at urban granaries, it stored for months without rotting. Bakers could predict fermentation times. Bread came out consistent, batch after batch. This reliability was not optional for cities. It was survival, and it depended entirely on a set of traits modern agriculture no longer breeds for. Modern agriculture operates on optimization, ideal soil, precise irrigation, calculated fertilizer application. When those conditions fail, so do the crops. Spelt evolved before optimization existed. It was domesticated over 7,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, then spread across Europe through regions with wildly different climates and soils. It adapted because adaptation was the only path to survival. Cold winters did not kill it. Late springs did not stunt it. Heavy rains did not rot it in the field. Poor fertility did not starve it. Spelt produced grain under conditions that would devastate modern wheat varieties bred for narrow tolerances. This resilience was not accidental. Spelt is a hulled wheat, meaning each grain remains wrapped in a tough outer husk even after threshing. That hull protected the seed from moisture fluctuations, temperature swings, and physical damage. Farmers across medieval Europe did not need perfect years to feed their families. They needed crops that would produce something even when conditions turned against them. Spelt delivered that consistency, century after century. But the hull did more than protect growing grain. It protected stored grain too. in ways that changed what cities could accomplish. Before refrigeration, before chemical preservatives, before sealed packaging, grain storage was a gamble. Insects invaded, mold spread, moisture caused rot. A granary filled in autumn could be half empty by spring from spoilage alone. Spelt's hull changed the equation entirely. The tough outer husk created a natural barrier around each grain. Weevils that could bore into naked wheat struggled to penetrate Spelt's armor. Mold spores found no entry point. Moisture that would swell and rot exposed kernels was blocked by the protective layer. This meant cities could store spelt for months, sometimes years, without significant loss. Granaries became true reserves rather than temporary holding areas. Sieges could be outlasted. Bad harvests could be survived by drawing on previous year's supplies. Food security stopped being seasonal and became structural. The hull also preserved nutrition. Vitamins and oils that degraded in exposed grains remained intact inside the sealed husk. Bread made from year-old spelt retained qualities that bread from improperly stored wheat had already lost. For thousands of years, this hull was spelt's greatest advantage. Then machines arrived, and everything inverted. The Industrial Revolution did not just change how goods were manufactured. It changed what counted as a good crop. Compatibility with machines suddenly mattered more than compatibility with soil, climate, or storage. Spelt's hull, the very feature that made it reliable, became a liability. Modern threshing machines were designed for free-threshing wheats, varieties whose grains separated cleanly from husks during harvest. One pass through the machine and grain was ready for milling. Spelt required an additional step. After threshing, the hulls remained attached. A second process, called de-hulling, was necessary before the grain could be ground. This extra step meant extra time, extra equipment, extra labor. Mills built for volume did not want to slow down for grain that needed special handling. Farmers received price penalties for spelt or were told to grow something else. The choice was framed as progress. Faster processing, higher throughput. What was not mentioned was what would be lost when the hull disappeared. Because spelt was not replaced by something better. It was replaced by something faster. Modern bred wheat dominates global grain production today. It is planted on more acres and processed through more mills than any other wheat species. But its dominance was never about being superior food. Nutritionally, spelt exceeds modern wheat in several categories. It contains more protein, often 2 to 3 grams more per 100 gram serving. It provides more fiber, more B vitamins, and higher minerals including manganese, phosphorus, and zinc. Its gluten structure differs in ways some people find easier to digest. Ecologically, spelt outperforms modern wheat on marginal land. It requires fewer inputs, tolerates poorer conditions, and resists diseases that require fungicides to control in conventional wheat fields. But none of these qualities mattered to the industrial system. What mattered was yield per acre under optimal conditions, bushels per hour through the mill, and loaves per day from the bakery. Modern wheat won on those metrics. It lost on resilience, nutrition, and sustainability. Agriculture made the trade anyway, choosing speed over durability. Cities paid the price without ever being told what they had given up. When spelt disappeared from urban food systems, something invisible disappeared with it. The grain that had buffered cities against crop failures and supply disruptions was replaced by a system that optimized for cheap abundance and accepted fragility as the cost. Modern wheat grows best in specific regions with specific conditions. It flows through centralized facilities, travels long distances, and arrives through supply chains spanning continents. When those chains function, bread is cheaper than ever. When they break, there is no local backup. Spelt had provided exactly that backup. It grew near cities on marginal land. It stored without expensive infrastructure. It could be milled locally, baked locally, and consumed locally without depending on distant systems. Replacing spelt meant replacing distributed resilience with concentrated efficiency. Everything became faster, cheaper, and more fragile simultaneously. Cities that once weathered disasters by drawing on local stores now rely on logistics networks that can collapse overnight. The safety net was removed so quietly that most people do not know it ever existed. When the grain disappeared, so did everything that came with it. Spelt was not just a crop, it was a system. Farmers knew how to grow it, millers knew how to process it, bakers knew how to ferment it into bread that lasted for days. That knowledge represented thousands of years of accumulated practice. When spelt was pushed out of mainstream agriculture, the knowledge went with it. Mills stopped accepting hulled grains, farmers switched to modern wheat or abandoned grain farming entirely. Bakers who had learned fermentation techniques specific to spelt retired without passing those skills forward. Within 2 generations, the chain broke. Young farmers did not learn spelt cultivation. Young millers never saw a dehulling machine. Young bakers never worked with flour that behaved differently than standardized industrial product. The recipes survived in books, but recipes without living knowledge are incomplete. How long to ferment, how wet to make the dough, how to adjust for humidity and temperature. These details exist only in practice, and practice requires unbroken transmission. What took 7,000 years to develop took less than a century to forget. But forgetting was not absolute.
In the margins, something survived. Spelt never went extinct. While industrial agriculture abandoned it, small pockets of cultivation persisted in places where machines mattered less than reliability. In the alpine regions of Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, farmers continued growing spelt under its German name Dinkel. The mountainous terrain did not favor large combines. The short growing seasons rewarded cold-tolerant varieties. Traditional food culture valued bread made the old way. These farmers did not preserve spelt for nostalgia. They preserved it because it still worked. On steep slopes and thin soils, modern wheat varieties underperformed or failed entirely. Spelt produced consistent harvests where nothing else would. Organic agriculture also provided refuge. Farmers seeking disease-resistant crops that did not require synthetic fungicides rediscovered spelt's natural protection. The hull that industrial mills rejected became valuable again. This survival at the margins proves something important. Spelt was never obsolete. It was never outcompeted by a superior grain. It was simply excluded from a system that measured value differently. Exclusion is not the same as failure. It is a choice made by those who control the system, and choices can be reversed. Today, spelt is returning to bakeries and small farms. It is marketed as an ancient grain, a heritage variety, a specialty product. These labels are not wrong, but they miss the larger point. Spelt was never a niche crop. It was the grain that fed cities. It was infrastructure designed over millennia to provide reliable urban nutrition under real conditions. Its value was not novelty. Its value was resilience that modern food systems have eliminated. Industrial agriculture replaced spelt because the system could not accommodate it. The hull that protected cities for thousands of years did not fit through machines designed for naked wheat. So the machines won. Now those systems show cracks. Soil depletion spreads. Climate volatility increases. Supply chains fail without warning. The conditions that made spelt essential for ancient cities are reappearing in modern ones. The question is not whether spelt was valuable. History answered that. The question is whether we will remember what was lost before we need it again. The
The grain that fed cities never disappeared. It waited at the margins, growing quietly where industrial systems could not reach. It is still waiting now, and it does not care how long it takes for us to remember.